Okay, and with this, I would like to start the next talk. It is once again by Tomas Persson, like said before, but just for the recordings. He's a business developer at Digitalist Sweden, and he has worked with tracking digital analytics since 2010 and has been a contributor to open source since 2007. And in this talk, how to break Matomo and also some inputs on how to fix it, Tomas will share his experience with us with running several large Matomo instances. As most people know, Matomo can be pretty slow when the data grows, and Tomas will share some of the biggest mistakes and also talk about how they manage them. And thank you. Please take it away.
Thank you. So yeah, sharing pains is usually good learning, and I hope you guys can ask a lot of questions, and yeah, we'll hopefully get some interaction going on as well. So this is actually based on my learnings or our learnings, I should say, because it's not only me at Digitalist working with Matomo, of course, but some things we learned during the last 4 years when we focused pretty intense on maintaining Matomo for a lot of clients. So let's start off by doing the short intro. I'm a generalist, but in this case, I kind of have a background in the 90s where I actually worked with hosting and maintaining the servers that were really physical and heavy and large at that time. So that knowledge I've kind of brought with me during the years and actually got to use pretty intensively while learning and managing Matomo for our large clients. Maybe you listened to my colleague Jorge yesterday that talked about how we technically maintain very large installations of Matomo just to get an idea of the size. I think we have databases that go above a bit of a terabyte of data, and we collect up to between 50 and 100 million actions per month stored in these databases. So they're quite big, and we maintain them in a setup using Kubernetes where we can scale things up and down. Obviously not the most standard setup, but I will not talk so much about Kubernetes today, more about the practical issues and the configurations that we can share with you guys. So this is a scenario that perhaps many of you have seen. We get different types of error messages or reports that are slow in Matomo, and obviously our users can be pretty sad when that happens. If you've been working with Matomo, you probably had these experiences over time. So my pro tips, if you want to have this scenario, is I have 3 main principal guidelines that you can follow if you want to have these problems. The first pro tips is to give your users in Matomo a lot of permissions from start without training them. This I can guarantee you will run into a lot of nice issues and problems. My second pro tips is to write bad applications and start tracking them in Matomo, and then of course blame Matomo for the problems that you end up having. We'll look in a bit more to this later on. And my number 3 pro tips is to let your IT department host Matomo without proper Matomo training. We'll also discuss a little bit in detail what this might lead to. Of course, I'm a bit in a joking mode here, but I'll try to give you some examples of why I give you these pro tips. So the first one about giving Matomo users too much permissions. Matomo is a quite complex tool. Of course, setting up tracking is something that requires quite a lot of skills in web development and also JavaScript. And you also need to know how the product works to do this properly. Otherwise, you will have bad data in your database, and the reports will be hard to understand. Also, creating segments or custom reports has to be pretty, you have to know what you're doing, so to speak, because they can actually kill your performance. I will give you examples of this later on. But also doing this wrong might lead to really, really bad user experiences because you need to know what you are doing and what you're showing to your users. So you should be really careful about giving away permissions and make sure that users that can create segments, for instance, know what they're doing. The last one, or the second one, write bad applications and blame Matomo for the issues. So this is actually something you need to be aware of, that Matomo is just a stupid system. Whatever you send to Matomo will be eaten by this system. So you can't really fix things that is broken in your application, or actually you can, and I will give you some example of that, but you need to have the mentality of understanding that Matomo is just a stupid system. So if you send bad data into Matomo, this could be personal data or whatever, Matomo will just eat that, and you will store it, and you will have problems in different ways. The two most important things to manage properly are URLs and titles, because these two will always be just stored in Matomo when you send it. And URLs is actually pretty important to manage in a large installation in particular. So the third guideline then, let your IT department host Matomo without proper training. Well, this goes for many systems, not just Matomo, but why it fails, and I actually have lots of experiences with it. We help a lot of Matomo clients, and they often approach us because they want help with implementing tracking or understanding the application. But usually I spend about a week with the IT department in the beginning just to fix things that hasn't been properly set up or taken care of. Because maintaining Matomo or any application actually requires you to know the application. It's not enough to just set up a server and install the software and then you're ready. And Matomo is really, really a tool that you need to know to maintain properly, because it needs constant updates, and testing comes with that. When we have a new release of Matomo, you really need to test this and know and understand what was actually installed and how will that affect our instance of Matomo. Even though we do this 24/7, we work with Matomo and learn, we still have problems when there are new updates, because you don't always know exactly what will happen in your Matomo environment. And this is, of course, since it's a complex environment, you have plugins, you have different integrations and so on, and every setup is unique. We need to have constant monitoring in place, and monitoring in this case is not only about does Matomo respond. It can be monitoring individual reports, or monitoring your database, or monitoring for errors really connected to Matomo. So this is also something you need to learn over time. Constant optimization. Your database will probably grow. I will show you examples of that. And that means you will continuously need to optimize. And again, constantly change your configurations depending on the needs of your users. So again, feel free to do this internally, but make sure that the people that is taking care of Matomo has this as their focus. It's a huge difference to just set up a server and install a software and maintaining an application properly. So let's look into some of the more specific problems that are related to users. I talked a little bit about segments and custom reports because these both two affects the aggregation in Matomo. Aggregation is the jobs that happens under the hood to produce the fast reports in the interface. So if you go to the page views report, that is actually an aggregation of the raw data, and to produce that, there are jobs running under the hood in Matomo, and they will require more server power. So every time you create a new segment or a custom report, you actually add a new job to Matomo to perform. I've seen recommendations in the community, and we try to have these recommendations as well, to not set up more than 100 segments for a site. And 100 segments, to be honest, can be quite a lot for your service to maintain as well. So yeah, keep that in mind. One thing we learned really the hard way is that if you create segments in Matomo and you use these kind of wildcard questions in your definitions, they have a large impact on your database performance. Because what happens is you see the SQL query that is created. This is not the exact query, but it's just an example. The important part is the search string at the end. When you send a query like that, which happens if you use the contains setting, is that we're not able to use indexes in Matomo. And when you create segments, these queries goes to one of the largest tables in the Matomo database, and indexes is a way to make queries faster, basically, in MySQL. But these type of queries cannot use indexes, so that means that they have to do a full table scan, which is kind of technical definition here. And that will really kill your performance if you have a lot of data. We're talking about minutes to run SQL queries if you have a large database, instead of maybe seconds if you have a proper index in place. So the impact here can be massive, and especially if you have a lot of these segments in place on a large database. So instead, you should try to change your segments into using starts with, for instance. If you do that, your query will be different, and MySQL will actually be able to perform these queries a lot faster. So it's quite important actually on a large data set to manage this. Yes, so with this in mind, make sure that only users with this knowledge can create segments, and this will also lead to that we avoid bad configurations, because I see a lot of users that actually use segments in the wrong way. I won't go into too much about that, but or I can. The example is if you want to filter out pages for a specific section of your site. I often see users creating segments for this because they misunderstand how segments work. Segments is a way to create a bucket of users matching certain criteria. So even though you will filter out page views for that particular section, you will also filter out page views for other sections that the users matching your segment criteria searched matched. So yeah, different thing. So okay, yeah. One thing I often see is also that users that create segments, you can do it on a personal level. So only you see the segment. As an administrator, and particularly on sites with a lot of users, I can see that sometimes there are up to 10 segments that are almost the same thing, because users create them under the hood. And this is also bad, because that means 10 jobs are running under the hood when you might only have needed one of them. So yeah, keep that in mind. And of course, this leads to avoiding performance issues. Also, this is a nice one. Look into the global ini.php file on your server and make sure you can actually set this is the user role needed to add segments in Matomo. So I think that the default one is view here, and that means that basically any user in your Matomo instance can create segments. So make sure to make it admin or super user or write or whatever your organization matches. So that's the good thing to look into. All right. So what about bad applications? Well, one thing that is really important for performance is to keep the number of URLs down. And the thing here is that if you, for instance, send Matomo can't differ between uppercase and lowercase. So if you have a page that will report sometimes with an uppercase and sometimes with a lowercase, Matomo will handle that as two different URLs. So make sure to always send lowercase URLs. Make sure to not send URL parameters if you can avoid that, because that will also create unique instances of URLs, meaning the jobs in Matomo needs to process every URL unique. Also, some CMSs sometimes send trailing slashes. The example here is my page, and that will not be the same as my page with an ending slash. Another common thing that you might want to avoid is, for instance, if you have an issue number with unique URLs containing numbers, you might want to look into anonymize these so that you don't store unnecessarily page views. So yeah, what I usually do is that I create, actually will show you a script that can do this later on. But this, sometimes you have an issue URL and you can end up with thousands of unique page views or unique URLs, but no one will never look at the unique page view for that. So anonymize them is actually good for performance and probably also for the analytics part to understand the site. So one way to do this, this is custom JavaScript that I add to a site. It's a variable. So what you can do here is that you create a URL cleanup. And in this example, I started off like I'm reading the URL from the browser and making it lowercase. The second one will remove trailing slashes. Then I have an example of how you can anonymize an order ID. So if you have an URL saying order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this will become order/order page. And the way you use this then is you go to your page view and you use this variable in your custom URL. And by doing so, you can actually clean your site. And this is also a good way if you have problematic applications. This kind of JavaScript can actually help you to anonymize and remove personal data if you find those kind of issues. So maybe you have an application that shares personal identification numbers or email addresses from clients or whatever. I've seen tons of bad examples there. You can actually use this kind of an URL to clean things. Another thing that I often see, and some CMS systems are really terrible here. So a good URL structure looks something like this. You have maybe URLs following your menu structure or other types of categories, and you have a clear structure in your URLs. And since Matomo is a stupid system, it will just take the URLs as you send them to Matomo. A bad example is if your CMS will have this kind of structure. This is also bad if you're into SEO, of course. But the point here is like if you go to your page views report, you will see something like this if you do a nice URL structure. You will have aggregated numbers matching your sections. So this is really a nice way to, or a nice feature of having nice applications. You can actually, if you have problems, you can actually fix some problems in this one. So sometimes I've seen applications where we have multiple URLs for the same page, which is obviously bad. Then you can add those things into this URL cleanup JavaScript as well, and maybe make sure that they are reporting under the same URL in your CM or in Matomo at least. So there are lots of ways we can help here. All right, so let's look into optimizing Matomo from a more of a server perspective. So some common issues in Matomo is that our transitions report is slow if you use that one. Custom date ranges are slow because what happens if you use a custom date range is that you're actually querying the raw data. The visitor log obviously is something that can be slow. Sometimes you can see that today's data is not coming in as quickly as you would like to. Maybe you don't see data for today until in the evening or whatever, or users get 500 errors or timeout errors or things like that. There's no general solutions here, but if you have a lot of these, and this is quite common if your data grows, you might want to look into your server configurations. First of all, look into the general guidelines. Always start there to see if are you even following the basics before you go into maybe my more advanced recommendations later on. In general, you need to understand that Matomo is a PHP application, and we usually refer to that as a LAMP installation. That means we have an Apache web server, we have MySQL, and we have PHP. Those are the basic main components. There are more, and you can actually change Apache to Varnish or some other web server, and MySQL can be MariaDB. So don't take it too much of a it can vary. But when you optimize these, you need to understand what kind of needs these systems have. So normally Apache is a very CPU intensive system, meaning what you can optimize there is usually threads and sometimes a bit of a memory, but you can optimize how you use the CPU. MySQL is usually memory and disk intensive, so make sure to have fast disks, and then you can often tweak MySQL variables. And this is actually one thing when I talk to IT departments that has been trying to maintain Matomo, they usually install the database in kind of the default setup that comes with MySQL, and that is probably the easiest way to make your Matomo server slow, because if you know MySQL, you can optimize, I think, over 200 variables. You shouldn't, but you can. But a MySQL application like Matomo that is very database intensive really needs a lot of optimizations. And there are great tools to help you with that. PHP is, of course, super important. And for that, we usually use the memory. And super important to cache PHP, because PHP is a language that will reprocess every page every time you see it, basically, or every time a function is loaded, it is actually processed, unless you use caching. So caching is key when it comes to PHP. One thing that is super nice, and particularly on larger installation, is to use the queue tracking plugin, which will offload your database significantly, and also give you features such as you can restart your Matomo installation without losing data. I really eager you to look into this one if you haven't already. You can also configure tons of things in Matomo. I linked to this little file on matomo.org. I'm gonna show you that actually. I'll just open that file just to give you an impression. But in your Matomo installation, you have a file called global.ini.php. This one is actually from GitHub. But just to give you an idea how much you can actually configure on your Matomo server or your particular Matomo instance, you can tweak a lot of things, and this is great because it means we can adopt Matomo in tons of ways. But it also means that you can get problems if you don't know what you're doing. So one thing you usually want to have control of is the number of rows that you allow in different reports. From a user perspective, you normally want to tweak this upwards because I think the default is that you show only 500 URLs in reports. If you have a lot of URLs, you obviously want more than 500. But setting them too high, and that means affecting performance. Auto scanning of forms, if you use the form analytics plugin, is something you should be really careful with. That can make your database grow. Also, keep an eye of how long you store your raw data. This is normally something you should know when you start, but sometimes people don't have a clue what that is, because that means the database is growing a lot. And also be a bit careful with plugins, because plugins will consume a lot of memory. And if you don't need them, don't install them. Yes, MySQL. This is actually something we learned. We are using MariaDB, and what we learned is that there are actually features in Matomo that use functions in MySQL that are not available in MariaDB. So if you're having a large database, you might run into problems. If you want to know the details, I think Jorge, my colleague, linked to those issues at Matomo.org. But one thing, on a large database at least, you need to keep an eye on the database size. You can use tools like Tuning Primary or MySQL Tuner to get the insights. And one thing we also learned is that over time, the number of tables in Matomo will grow. And you might want to check these configuration options, or actually configuration variables in MySQL. Because if you don't adjust these according to your database, you might have performance issues. There are also optimizations that you can do to make transition reports faster. So there is an FAQ there. Every Matomo installation is quite unique, so I wouldn't recommend you to just apply every index for databases that you find. You should really try them and test how they affect your installations. Indexes can grow your database quite a lot, and you should do this with care. But this is obviously something you can look into and test. Another thing that is quite common is that if you have a lot of segments and custom reports, you might want to start looking into how to optimize the archiving that happens under the hood. One thing we've been doing is that if a client has a lot of websites, normally there is only one or two websites that have a lot of data and a lot of segments, and the other websites in the installation are usually small. So one good thing is actually to separate these into different jobs, meaning one job that might be heavy and take a lot of time will not affect the smaller sites. So having two jobs, you can just do this, skip ID site number one, then force ID site equals one on the other job, and that will offload or actually give faster reports for the small sites. Another example is to separate so that you run segments separately. That means that if you're not applying a segment, those jobs might be faster, but then you might have other segments that might take time. If someone configured, for instance, segments containing wildcards, that takes a lot of time. You can actually separate these into specific jobs. Maybe these reports will take hours to process, but the other segments will respond faster. So that's something you can look into and start tweaking. Another example is that you want to start optimizing your archiving processes. You can actually use these flags like concurrent request per website or concurrent archivers, and you can also start collaborating with the PHP memory that an archive can consume. But this is really something you should know what you're doing before trying, or you can try it and see and learn. One thing that I've been doing is that I've actually created a plugin. To warn you a bit, this is actually a plugin I wrote to learn how to write plugins. So it's maybe not the most beautiful code I ever written, but it's been a good learning. But what it actually does is that it adds some reports to my Matomo installation. So under the hood, I can go in and get a few recommendations. So I have these performance tips, for instance, that will give me some insights on how my database feels, and I'm doing some calculations on how my MySQL database is performing. And in this case, for instance, we're not really following the recommendations on how to configure Matomo. This is a database setting that we should change, and I also link to a recommendation for Matomo. So yeah, this is something I've been improving over time, and we actually use it in our database to get some feedback. Another thing I recently added is regarding these segments. Oh, I wasn't logged in. I will fix that. Hang on. Oh, I can't actually, because this one requires me to be on a VPN, so we won't do that. But I actually created a list of problematic segments. So segment containing wildcards. You can go to this repository and download it, and please give feedback. Maybe you want to help to contribute to make it to follow the the coding guidelines of Matomo. But basically, I have created some ways to easily get status variables and things like that. Yeah. What else? We have it's time for questions.
Okay, then thank you. We have
Thanks.
one question at the moment, which is, would you be interested in publishing the DB Health plugin on the marketplace?
Definitely, but I need some help. Maybe Lucas can help me to to code review. But I would definitely be interested in doing that. It's already free to download, so I guess if Lucas help out, it would be nice.
You might look into it. So if there are any other questions, feel free to ask them. I'm just gonna give a few moments for that.
Yeah, hang on. All right. So no new questions, right?
It seems. Wait, someone's typing.
Yeah.
So just few more seconds, maybe. Okay, maybe not.
All right.
I mean, as always, the chat stays open. So maybe if you see a question later, you can answer it then.
I will.
But with that, for now, I think I want to thank you again.
Yep.
And
Thanks.
I mean, you're gonna have another talk, I think, next hour. But
Yeah.
have a great day until then.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.